Hey everybody, welcome to the DVS Film Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me as always is my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DVS Films. Today we're going into part 2 of the post-production process. Hopefully we're going to give you a few tips and tricks that we use to make through the tough, difficult process that is editing. In the first episode, we did kind of highlight the overall impression we have, overall mindset, and just kind of the high level concept. So be sure to take a look at that before you listen to this one if you haven't already. Also, you can take a look at us online on our Discord channel. That is the place to be. We make movies for our fans, with our fans. So that means we're always looking to work with our community as much as possible in bringing these movies to life. So, with that being said, Brendan, we've kind of hopped into the overview of it. Now we're going to be looking at, getting more of the tactical ideas when it comes to editing. But I think a good place to start is to just, again, summarize how critical and important the editing process is. This is where most movies, unfortunately, go to die in the indie filmmaking process. And this is also one of the most important ways for you to get experience. So you just want to talk about that briefly, how editing literally is where you become a filmmaker when it comes from experience.
I think it's the most important aspect of 3 phases of filmmaking. And I think that it's probably the least respected. I think a lot of filmmakers think that, writing the script is the most important process. And yes, you have to have a good story. You have to have a good screenplay. But, having the control that the editor has to be able to manipulate the footage, to pace the movie properly is such a powerful tool. It's such a powerful part of the process, because that's really where you can pace the movie and create the movie that you want to make. And if you don't have, skills as an editor, and you're handing it off to somebody else who is not as passionate about your movie or doesn't have the same vision that you have, you're not going to have that control. And I think some of the best directors have a fundamental understanding of how to write a good screenplay, of how to shoot a good movie, and how to edit the movie. Whether or not they are the ones championing each part of the phase, you can have other writers help you write. You can have a DP and a crew to help you shoot a movie, and you can work with other editors because it is good to get other people's feedback on it. But you have to have an understanding of all 3 phases of the process. You can't just be a writer director. You have to be a writer director and editor, because if you're not the last piece, the editor, which I believe is the most crucial part of the filmmaking process, you're going to really struggle to get your vision, essentially told, to be able to get the movie that you actually want. That's the movie that's in your head, actually finally uploaded. I think having another editor working on that is going to be detrimental to your process, unless they're a very, very good editor and you're just very good at communicating exactly what you want. And for indie filmmakers, I just don't think you have access to those kind of editors. I don't think you have access to those kind of resources. So once again, you got to be the one you have to be the driving force of your movie. And with that being said, you have to be the editor. You have to be the one making the final choices, for your film on the timeline sequence to get this thing finally uploaded.
I completely agree with that. And again, going back to the first episode, we really kind of stress the overall view there. But in this episode, we're going to dive into a lot of the more tactical things. And the first thing I want to start with is something that I think is a massive problem in the filmmaking industry in general, specifically in indie film. And that's filmmakers love to overcomplicate things to make them seem harder than they actually are. Whether it just comes from writing, whether it comes from filming, whether it comes from editing, it feels nice to be like, oh no, this is something really, really tough. Whether it comes down to the writing process of you need to have it structured like this, or, it needs to follow these types of outlines or all this stuff. Whether it comes to filming, we need to have the best equipment and the best lights and the best everything. Or if it comes to editing, you have to use all of the tools and all the functions, and you need the editing software. It's way more basic than that. I think, from my experience, once we hopped in and learned everything and got an idea, really the majority of it is having your internal idea of how the scenes cut together, more so than any tools or effects within the software itself. So do you want to talk about that real quick? What your interpretation of, kind of what I just said there?
Yeah, I would say, from my experience, less is more all the way through this entire process from screenplays. I think the simplest, most minimalistic screenplays are going to be your best screenplays. I think shooting, if you just use a tripod, a simple camera that can pass quality control, and like a shoulder rig, you're better than most indie filmmakers, and you use natural lighting. As far as editing goes, the same way. You don't even have any crazy like LUTs or crazy, special effects or kind of crazy stuff like that. Just get a simple movie on the timeline and go. And even distribution companies, some will come and promise you the moon and take out these huge marketing expenses. For most indie filmmakers, go with the one that's going to get you up on the platforms that you want, that's going to chart, that has no bells and whistles, that is basically like, hey, this is what we do. We're going to upload your stuff. And like all the way through this process, it looks very complicated, and you can fall for the pitfall of the complicated, crazy looking stuff, or you can go with the simple, minimalistic stuff. And I think that's where you need to go. Premiere looks like a crazy piece of software. You fire it up, it takes all your computer resources. There's a million different buttons and everything. But really, if you learn how to use the button, all you have to really do is import your footage, figure out how to drop it on the timeline, make sure your timeline settings are the settings that you want. And then you use the cut tool and the magnet tool, and you just kind of space things together. And that's it. You can learn that in 5 minutes. And then at that point, it starts to become the natural process of understanding how to cut a movie together, which is a skill. And I think that takes a long time to master. But as far as Premiere looks super complicated, it just looks very, very difficult, when really it's just drag and drop. And once you learn what the tools do and how to do them, and learn a couple of problems, like how to solve a couple of problems, honestly, you can cut your whole movie together. It's not a big deal. So I would say watch a couple of videos on Premiere. There's a wealth of knowledge on YouTube for free. Play around with your movies yourself. I've taught multiple people how to do Premiere, and trust me, they can pick it up in 30 minutes. Whether or not they're good at it, once again, it's a skill, but you can start learning very, very quickly. Just get over the fact that this looks like this crazy piece of software, because it really isn't.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the biggest thing, that you mentioned, the skill comes from you understanding and the experience of it. When I look back at it, my experience now of what I'm doing versus when we first started editing. And again, we'll walk in detail of how we learned how to do it for a little bit. But I remember when we first went through like the 15-hour course of like all of the stuff, I was looking to kind of be a little bit more complicated, like doing everything that I learned. Now it's way more basic. I just stick to the like few key things, as you mentioned: razor tool, moving them, selecting all, moving it over, figuring out how to get the audio channels, confirming if it's peak, like just very, very basic stuff. And with that being said, I think the biggest difference is I'm much quicker at it. So I can do it super quick, and I almost kind of like, I feel where my places are in the Premiere because I'm doing the same thing. So your speed is increased, but the only real benefit I've had skill wise is just I understand when the cut should happen, where our pacing's at, how to drag these things together, when to cut, when not to cut, what looks good. And that just comes from experience. It doesn't come from understanding the software. So, that you already hopped in, we do use Premiere Pro for our editing tool. My big thing is I think all editors are exactly the same for what you're looking at the indie film level. Now, again, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of fancy tools and stuff like that that have a purpose there that can do a lot of things. But with that being said, you're not a professional editor needing those abilities. And even then, you can probably find another way to get around it. Because one thing I want to talk about really quickly right now is you get to a certain level where I think there's technical issues and there is aesthetics. And the technical issues, those are basically your sound's off, your picture's off, the frames are off, you can't use it. It is not possible, and it affects the pacing. The aesthetic issues are color and sound. And it even got to the point where I no longer will touch a color edit, because if I edit to my color, you'll simply be like, what is this color edit? And I'll be like, well, I think it looks good. And you'll be like, this looks terrible. So, with that being said, your thoughts on all editors, is there anyone that's different or whatnot? And then your thoughts on, as an editor, there's two types of problems: your technical problems, which you need to fix, and those aesthetic ones, which at the end of the day, it's your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I've only used Premiere Pro, so I can't really talk about like the other editing softwares, but I assume they're similar. Find one that you feel comfortable with. I don't think there's a wrong answer. Um, we just had the Adobe Premiere subscription for my other business, so we use Adobe Premiere. It's not a huge deal. Um, and as far as like, yeah, I think there's two things that you need to be aware of when editing a movie. And I think Kel nailed it. It's just what stuff's going to pass quality control. So if you're uploading to a distribution company, you have to pass quality control. Your sound has to be leveled to a specific, um, it has to be leveled to the broadcast standard. You have to be properly exposed, and you have to properly light stuff, and there can't be clipping or kind of peaking or kind of any issues like that to pass quality control. Once you pass quality control, anything outside of that range is just creativity. It's up to you. It's your own, it's just your vision of the movie, how you color the movie. There's no right or wrong answer. Yeah, there's like, I've seen indie movies where they'll do like a night scene and it looks purple. And would I do that? Probably not, but it's up to them. So that's just, once you pass quality control, the rest is just up to you. So I don't think there's one right answer. And there's just a ton of different options that you do, but that's your own style. It's your own filmmaking style. What color you use. We use something similar to David Fincher where I highlight, I use yellow and blue, contrasting colors. And that's just what we do. The background's blue. The skin tones are more yellow. And that's just what I like. I like that kind of stuff. And we'll rotate around, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's not right either. It's just my style. You can do whatever you want to do. I think that's unique. I remember the Florida Project was a really cool movie where everything is like super bright and super saturated. And I remember watching this movie, I was like, for such a dark and depressing movie, it's crazy how they saturated. But if you go look at the cinematographer, they wanted to give it like this, the movie shot through the eyes of the girl and everything. She's essentially living in Disneyland. So they wanted everything super saturated, everything super bright, everything sort of blown out. And that was a stylistic choice. So I think once you pass quality control, the rest is up to you, man. Do whatever you want to do. And there is no right or wrong answer. You could ask a lot of people for their opinion, but once again, you're the one making the movie. It's up to you.
Yep, and that's a good way to kind of approach it before you hop in. So now we're going to kind of walk through our process, and something that we've mentioned all the time, and I think is one of the reasons we're able to kind of streamline this production for multiple reasons, is having an editor on set. And we've mentioned, hey, you want to be the one editing, but if you're the cinematographer, videographer, you probably have to work with someone else. When we're on set, I'm typically the live editor, and we're going to quickly highlight the purposes of the live editor, but then we're going to hop into, why it sets you up for success. But again, the live editor is really a safety stop for an indie filmmaker. You are filming a ton. You do not have the budget to take a look at dailies, to have all of this time. We're basically on a 10x speed schedule of what we need to film. And your job as a live editor is to catch any issues. Again, the first thing we said, technical issues. So if you want to do the live editing process, literally all I'm doing, grabbing the footage, organizing the footage, throwing it on a timeline, confirming just through the wides we have enough to get through the scene process. Do you quickly want to just touch on how that is probably one of the best things you can do in the production process?
Oh, 100%. If you were to ask me, what is the one person other than myself I need at set, all my money to go to an editor, 100%. And this is me doing 11 movies. So I've shot 3 movies myself now. I know how to shoot 90% of the scenes. I am 100% confident in how I could shoot these scenes, because it goes back to what Kel said. When he's editing a movie, you kind of get this sixth sense of when to cut, different parts of the movie. So I have that in my head as I'm shooting the movie. So I'm sort of editing and shooting at the same time. This comes from skill, comes from shooting a lot and understanding how to do this stuff. This is 90% of the scenes. I feel really confident about it that I could do it. The last 10%, I don't know if I'll ever feel confident. And these are usually the action scenes, multiple cut scenes, multiple angle scenes. In the murder house, it was the Ouija scene. It was very, very technical, very, very difficult. In the Shapeshifter movie, it was essentially the stabbing final climax finale, which had multiple characters, multiple shots, multiple angles. Yes, you can fall back on wides and close-ups, but does it actually cut together is very, very difficult. It is very, very difficult to see. You're running gun, you're moving fast. You don't know if you got it all. And to have Kel be like, hey, this is good, or we need these pickups, which is what happened in the Shapeshifter. We needed pickups on the last day. We got them. The movie's much, much better. If you're a new filmmaker, you just don't have that luxury of just guessing. Because if you're going back and never looking at your footage and you're just hoping and praying that it all cuts together, I guarantee you it's not going to cut together. And honestly, some small little cuts, little inserts here and there could save your movie. And then also it goes back to large technical issues. As an indie filmmaker, you don't have a dedicated sound guy making sure all your audio is absolutely 100% clear. The mic could fall off. In the Shapeshifter, we had some kind of weird high-pitched noise in some of the shots. Sometimes the actors will turn off their mic and forget to turn it back on. These things will absolutely crush an indie film. Just one scene without audio, it's done. It's game over. Essentially, you have to do pickups. So you have to really make sure, that the live editor will be able to come in and tell you, hey, something's wrong. We have to reshoot this. There could be issues with your camera. In one of our movies in the Whitlow house, there was like a green hue. One of the sensors was bad. So all this stuff is discoverable by having a live editor. I get so stressed going back through all the footage, making sure we have everything, putting it on the timeline. I can't even imagine trying to do that without someone saying, hey, I looked through this stuff. It's all good. If I'm having to go through there and just hope and pray that I got all the sound is good and all the audio is good and all the visuals are good and the performances are good, and I'm going scene by scene, oh man, dude, that is going to be so stressful. So I'd say, look, if you got the money, honestly, you should have the money to have a live on-set editor, and it's going to save you a lot of time. It's going to save you a lot of effort. And just for him to say, hey, Brendan, this scene cuts together, it looks good, move on, takes so much stress off my plate. It's just that in general is just worth it.
Yeah, and I have to say, even the 90% that you're, talking about, you're still nervous about those. So it really is something that is a lot of benefits. It's critical in making sure you have that footage, because again, those are the bombs that explode in the post-production. But leading into it, I'm able, not only being a live editor, but I'm able to do the very first thing, which I think is incredibly hypercritical, which is just pure organization of your film. It's one of those things where I think step one, and what I do is when I get the raw, I basically say, here's our raw footage. I back it up so we have data management. Then I take each of those clips, I put them in a little folder on Premiere, and in the folder it says, here's the raw clips. And then I have a separate sequence that says, here's the scene itself. And this process alone, if you set it up correctly, just having a clean plate, and we started doing it since Girl in Cabin 13, because I remember with Devil in the Room, having to go back and, where was this clip? What day did we film this? And that eats up so much time. If you can just take all of your information in, sort it out, have it nice and clean right in front of you, it will save you so much time. And that's something, a 1-2 punch. So can you kind of talk about, and again, this is kind of new to me because, I give it to you like this, but having it set up like that and how that can increase your ability to say, oh, let me hop into scene 27. Because by the end of the shoot, we basically have scene 1 through, 100 or whatever it ends up to right in front of you, all organized. It's easy to go ahead and do that. And honestly, that process itself is like 20-30 hours if you really look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I used to pay our editor for a whole week. It took him a week to, just go through all the footage and put everything in the bins. So for that week that you're paying the editor, you can have the editor just go on set, live edit, and also, put everything in the actual correct folders. And it makes my life a lot easier because, when I'm going through this stuff, just having the scene, because you work scene by scene, having all the footage and all the scene in there is much easier than trying to go in, find random clips and stuff. And just having level organization is going to save you 2 or 3 weeks because things can get very unorganized very quickly. And just having everything nice and organized allows you to focus your time and energy on, getting something on the timeline, which is the first step, as opposed to just sitting there and, searching for different clips. And I think that's a big thing, because you're like, I know I shot this. Where is it? Where is it? You have to go search through 40 hours of footage to find one specific scene. So, I mean, it's definitely a huge benefit of an on-site editor. And if you're gonna pay for an editor to go through all your footage and organize it, just pay them to come out and go to your film shoot and organize it on the fly, because you could kill two birds with one stone. I don't see this a lot in indie filmmaker making, and honestly, it's probably one of the better hacks that we have. Is just pay your on-set editor to come on set. They don't need to work the 12 or 14 hours that you usually have, the cast and crew work, but just having them on set for 8-hour days, organizing your footage, and then, giving you the thumbs up or the thumbs down on whether or not it cuts together, or whether there's crucial issues, is honestly going to say is probably literally the best investment you can make. So I'm calling it right now. On-set editor, best investment you can make as an indie filmmaker.
Yep, 100% agree. Just because again, it saves us so much issues in the long run that it is easily worth it. And to give you guys an idea, it's not like my whole job on set is on-set editor. Usually also acting in a few roles. I'm typically helping out with the production stuff. I'm trying to do behind the scenes. I'm just helping out with the entire process. So my point bringing that up is that's not a full dedicated time commitment thing. I'm simply looking to confirm we got it. This works. It's good to go. And that kind of brings us to the first cut, which I think is super critical. Again, mine's a little bit of a hybrid because I am trying to figure it out on set. And what I look for on set is, yep, there's no issues with the wides. There's no issues with the sound. There's no issues with these scenes are good. Next one, put it on the timeline. Does it cut together, and so on. So I think the very first thing, as we kind of mentioned, that first edit, you want to first spend time organizing, getting everything together. And then the first thing you want to do is from point A to point B, get everything on set super rough. And typically this super rough is usually just the pacing outline of it, in the sense of how one scene moves to the other. And what I really want to highlight on this is, because we have the experience, we're easily able to understand what's not an issue and what is an issue. And a lot of times in these scenes, I'll have audio bleed over. Like I'll make it so like we'll pick up someone kind of talking from another conversation. So the audio sounds really weird. The people talking in the background, I completely ignore all of that stuff. All I'm really looking for is, what does that physical picture look like after it's good and after the audio is good? The first draft is just, what does it physically look like to move through this movie in a very clunky, rough fashion? And all we're looking for is, where are the big pacing issues? And more importantly, where does the movie just critically stop? The momentum stops. We're missing something. It doesn't work. It stands out. So do you want to talk about what you're looking for when it comes to that very first edit that I'm providing to say, here's the rough baby from point A to point B?
Yeah, so usually after we wrap, I'll watch Kel upload his cut. And like you said, it's very rough, but I'm looking for, number one, to make sure everything's technically sound and I have enough in there to edit it. For my first draft, or for my first cut, which, I just finished with the shapeshifter, I'm trying to look for pacing issues. So I'm kind of going through there and I'm kind of cutting it to where I need to cut it to, but I'm not spending a lot of time on one scene. Because I'm going to isolate those scenes for later, and I'm really going to dive into them on the second cut. The first cut is to just try and find where this movie is too slow and where we need to speed it up, and where the movie is too fast and we need to slow it down. So you can speed a movie up through montages, through quicker cuts. You can slow a movie down through B-roll, or slowing down the conversation, or adding more wide shots, or adding more establishing shots. And this is a skill, but I'm just trying to get a well-paced movie from start to finish, without spending too much time on one scene. And the one recommendation I would do is get your placeholder music in there now. And it doesn't need to be the placeholder music that you need to use. I use a lot of placeholder music from other horror movies, but music will really dictate your pace, and it's really hard to make decisions without having the music in place. we made this mistake in really our first 8 movies. We were cutting without music in there. So we show it to people, and honestly, you could show them one without music and one with with music, and people, you could not change anything, and the people will love the one with music. Is completely different. They will tell you it's much faster paced. Everything's much better because you just don't understand the importance of music until you actually see it. So your first draft, very basic, very rough. I'm spending the bare minimum of time in each scene just to try and get the pace that I want. I'm adding music, I export, I get feedback on it. And all I'm asking for is, hey, where is this movie too fast? Where is this movie too slow? Don't worry about audio issues. Don't worry about visual issues. I'm just looking for pacing. And when you get this feedback, you kind of have to only show people who know what movies are, because a lot of people are just going to, point out the visual and audio issues that you just haven't fixed yet. So it's usually Kel will pretty much be my only feedback on this. Some of my writers who have worked with me on films in the past will be my feedback, but I also have a good enough understanding myself to, make changes. But that's really just my first pass. I'm trying to lock in the pacing. Don't really worry about anything else other than the pacing. I want to have the music in there so I know and I can get a feel for what I'm trying to do. And then once I have the pacing, I'm making notes on specific scenes that just need more attention, because that's the second edit that I'm going to do. So I'm really going to dive into these scenes and try and really clean them up.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what you mentioned there was something I was going to bring up. I think is super critical. Do not show your edit to anyone without audio. Just don't do it. Do not do that, because like you said, there is something, and I think since you brought it up, we can kind of touch on it right now, but you need to understand when the right time to show your movie is for feedback. Because as you mentioned, you can literally say, hey man, this isn't here, this isn't there, it's not ready yet. And they'll come back and be like, hey, it's not there, it's not here ready yet. All the things you said to ignore, they don't ignore them, they focus in on them. One of the big ones is audio. As we mentioned right now, it's probably one of the best things you can do. We're in kind of a unique situation just because of how amazing our community is and the feedback we can get on a very data analytical way. Like we can literally ask our super fans to watch the movies and we'll get hundreds of results of, this is where we think the movie's falling off. But this again goes back to your experience and what you're looking for. And, as you kind of mentioned, the pacing part of things. And one of the biggest questions that we try to ask people is, would you continue to watch this movie? And when you show someone a movie for the first time, that is your first look at it. If you can go back to them and say, hey, I fixed this and I did this, they're still going to have that first impression back of it. And I think a lot of indie filmmakers, they show something very rough, they get feedback they don't like, and then they kind of completely ditch it. So do you want to just talk about getting feedback in that editing stage, in the sense of, I've had feedback where, like, I think one of the crazier ones that I've always had is I'll get feedback from people who say that the movie we have, for instance, Girl in Cabin 13, one of my really good buddies, he literally watched all the movies. He watched this one. We sent it to him before the color and before the sound. And again, the color can just be a basic LUT, so it's just not flat, and the sound can be generic music, so it's, not the ones you're using. And he said, damn, you guys really took a step back. This is way worse than your other movies. With that being said, our experience, what we know, what we already have, you're completely incorrect. This is a much better movie for numerous levels. We added in the sound, we added in the color. He takes that word back, says, hey, it's completely the best one there. So I just want to kind of highlight when you get feedback, because people don't know. If they're not in the indie level, they don't understand. They're comparing it to Hollywood, and these mistakes, they don't understand what is easily patching over, which is easy to do, versus what we are looking for, which is major pacing issues, which are major problems that we have to work on.
Oh, it's absolutely wild. The difference from a first cut to the final cut is just absolutely night and day. And for the first time, I had a friend watch from the first cut of the Murder House to the ending cut. They watched every single cut, and they're like, I cannot believe the difference. Like, it's completely night and day. Even our mom, who watched the Murder House a couple times, the last cut, she's like, wow, it's really crazy how, like, having the sound effects and the music and everything finally polished, and like camera movement, how the little things add up so much to just make a better product. And honestly, as an indie filmmaker, your gut is to show, the cut as soon as you possibly can to get feedback on it. Because it's a thing, you want to get feedback. I always try to get feedback. And after doing this 11 times, my experience in how I'm going to operate now is to show it to people to get feedback who understand the filmmaking process. This is Kel. This is a few of my writers who have been in the filmmaking process, who understand this process, and that's it. I will not show this movie to anyone else until it's very, very close to being finished. The audio doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to have anything crazy as far as like color in there, but I'm going to put a basic color on there. I'm going to clean up the audio so people don't really get upset about it. And then I'm going to show it to people. And at that point, it's pretty close to upload it, or like the ability to upload it. But that's just how it has to be in order to get honest feedback from it. Because even for the Murder House, I specifically stated to a lot of people, said, hey, look, the color's not, finalized. The audio is not finalized. I don't worry about this stuff. I can fix it. And you know what? 90% of the feedback was, hey, this color doesn't look good and the audio doesn't look good. So it's like, shit, man, like what the heck? But that's just what it is. People just have a very, very hard time watching a movie, especially if you're asking them for feedback, because they're going to go into it. And that's the feedback that I want. I want really hardcore feedback, but you have to get it really close to being completed to get the good feedback, which is the story and the pacing feedback. That is the feedback that you want. And unfortunately, you have to get a movie very close to being uploaded or very close to completed, or at least just a basic color and audio good enough where it's not distracting in order to get that up. And I wish it would be different, but I think that's just the nature of the beast. If you're getting the feedback, and you need a lot of feedback, because you don't want just a couple of your friends or family, because they're going to tell you, hey, good job, buddy. Like, you made a movie, good work. You want to get a lot of random people who have no connection to you, and you'll get as much feedback as possible. In order to get the best feedback, you're going to have to really put in the work on the edit to get it to the point where it's not distracting as far as audio and color issues.
Yeah, it's such a tough thing to do. And I mean, again, as I mentioned, specifically tell people, hey, this is where it's at. And I think this also comes from having the experience. We're able to look at something and understand, okay, well, if you polish this, you'll be good. If you polish that, you'll be good. If you're able to do this, you'll be good. And that only comes from experience. That only comes from having another movie in that same similar area, being able to take the product you have and get it to the finished project that you need. That's the only way that you get the ability to look at something. And I can look at something with Brendan and be like, yeah, this is it. I mean, and right now, even, as Brendan's going through the shapeshifter, he was kind of saying like, oh, I don't know, this one's rough. And I'm already calling it. I'm saying, no, this one's the best, looks the best, flows the best, pace is the best. Any of the issues that you're pointing out, I think you're just being your typical pessimistic stuff. And the reason for that is because of the experience that I have. I've seen the Murder House in the rough. I've seen The Devil in the Room in the rough. I've seen all of our movies in the rough. And because of that, you're able to pull from it. When it's your first time seeing a movie in the rough, you just don't have a clue. And as much as we tell you to ignore these issues, the human brain is going to pick those things apart because it feels weird at watching it. You're not used to that in a movie, and that's going to flag all of it. So, getting feedback is super hypercritical when it comes to it. But I also want to, think the biggest thing is that we look for is multiple feedbacks of something, because here's another issue with feedback I want to talk about. Each person has their own opinion, and at some point you're going to get pulled 10 different ways. And the biggest thing we try and focus on is critical moments such as scares and beats to make sure they actually hit or are doing something. And then the second thing is, a lot of times we're not our audience, so we're like, is this too cheesy? Is this not cheesy enough? What do you guys think of this or that element? How does it affect the mood? So do you want to quickly go into, you do need a good feedback stream. This is not the easiest thing to do. Again, we have our superfan community, which is super unique in the filmmaking industry, but you also have to take everyone's feedback with a grain of salt and understand that whole creative opinion comes into the factor. So that's one of the things you have to wrestle with. And what's kind of your way of approaching it when it comes to the editing process of figuring out what is feedback that's showing you something you don't see because you're not the audience, and what's just someone's personal opinion.
Well, it's wild because we finally got, we asked the super fans for feedback, right? And this is a game changer. Like it's what we do in the publishing business. We have a beta readers that give us a ton of feedback on stuff. And like I said before, you want to try and avoid friends and family. You want to try and get feedback from people who like the genre, like the movie, but have no affiliation to you. So in the publishing industry, we write a book, we send it out to 100 beta readers. They give us feedback on it, we make changes. Never really had that with the filmmaking process before Murder House, because we just never really had a community. Now that we have the community, it's super powerful. I'm super excited about this. What's really interesting to me is we ask all these questions, and there was a lot of questions that were split 50-50, as in some people liked it, some people didn't. And it was almost 50-50. And to me, if it's 50-50, you have to make a choice. What do you like? What do I like? It's a director's choice. What I'm looking for is the ones that were like 80%, this is not good. 70%, this is not good. Where the majority is saying this is a problem. The movie's too slow here. This scene's not scary enough. I don't like this part. Those are the things that I fix. If it's 50-50, you're not going to please everybody. And that's just what it is. I mean, even if you look at like The Conjuring and Insidious, some of the better horror movies, go look at their Rotten Tomatoes rankings or the IMDb rankings. It's like 5. So that means that like a lot of people just do not like those movies, and you're not going to be able to please everyone. Film is a very polarizing industry. For every person that says it's really, really good, people are like, this is absolutely horrible, especially for horror movies, especially for independent movies. There's a lot of people that like independent movies. There's a lot of regular people who just watch them and like, this is low budget. This is trash. Thanks, man. Appreciate your feedback. But you have to understand that, you got to do what's best for the film. And if a lot of people are saying there's a problem with the scene, there's probably a problem with the scene. A big mistake that I see a lot is where, the director gets all this feedback. People are like, hey, this scene is a huge problem. And they're like, nah, not a problem. I like it. Don't do that. If a lot of people are bringing up the same scene, the same issues, you have to fix that. It is your responsibility as a filmmaker. My job is not to make the film that I want. My job is to make the film that I want, but also everybody else likes. We make our movies for our fans. I want to make a movie that people will enjoy, right? And if a lot of people are saying, hey, there's a problem with this scene, even if I really like the scene, even if I think it's the greatest scene ever, my responsibility as a filmmaker is to fix that scene. So you have to not only get your feedback, you have to listen to your feedback. Make sure your feedback is just not friends and family, because they're really going to be like, hey, good job, honey. Like, you did a great job. You made a movie. Congratulations. I'm so proud. You're my son. Excellent. That's not going to help you out. So we're very lucky with the fan base that we built up. It's extremely powerful, and I am super grateful for it. But if you don't have that, try and get friends of friends. And you got to listen to their feedback. Like, it's your responsibility as a filmmaker to listen to their feedback.
100%. And I mean, like, honestly, guys, it's the feedback's worth it. Get them a Starbucks gift card. You know what I mean? Like, reward them for giving this feedback, because it's going to show you glaring issues. And the things that the super fans have brought up now, I can guarantee you those would be the 1 stars that we see. And if you look at each one of our movies, there's typically 1 or 2 polarizing scenes that someone brings up and is like, this is dumb. Why did this happen? And those are the things that can get brought up ASAP, and you can adjust them, because again, you just get blinded. So the last thing I do want to kind of talk about, and I think this is just something that happens regardless when you stay with a project for so long, you become blind to it. And it really is something that you just can't see anymore. And that's why the feedback is really good. But you need to understand this when you're getting closer and nearer and nearer. You need to set yourself a deadline for upload, say this is the best it's going to be. And I think you should also understand this. I think the least point you're going to like the movie is typically either in the rough when you have to go through the work, or right before you upload it. Honestly, I think you've been working with it for so long, you've watched it so many times. I mean, I remember watching Girl in Cabin 13 probably like 37 times, and I just hated it, man. Just watching that thing over and over again was so brutal, and you're just like, let's just get this done and be over with it. And now watching Girl in Cabin 13, I absolutely love it. It's great. I mean, it's everything it is. And I think that comes from 2 reasons. One, I think it comes from, you're always going to have an appreciation for it when it's up. Sure, there's some things where you're like, man, I wish I did it better. But the second thing and the more powerful thing, we have another movie ready to go. We're moving on. This is a progression tool. This is a stepping stone. And because we're able to do that, we can look back on it with a very positive opinion. So while we're kind of being, negative and like pessimistic, I think it is something to know that as long as you have this mindset of getting it uploaded and done, and it's a growing experience, you're always going to look back and like it. I mean, we were watching Gone recently, which is our first movie, and that thing's wild. And for multiple reasons, it's like, just clumsily, like just janked together when it comes to like the actual editing process and the scenes that we used and all of these cuts and everything. But it's still something when you look at it, you're like, wow, this is really awesome. So you want to just talk about that feeling you kind of get from being too used to a project and being, hey, you got to upload it. Because I think in the indie film, when that feeling happens, instead of people being like, oh, I need to power through it, they say, oh, I need to take a break from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole seeing the forest from the trees analogy, and I use it a lot. Usually, if you're just so far into editing that it's just hard to see the big picture anymore, you can get lost in scenes, and it's just almost like information overload. With editing, you have 40 hours of footage that you have to condense to an hour and 20 minutes, and there's literally an infinite amount of ways to cut a scene. And you don't know, I still don't know if the ways I'm cutting these scenes are the best. There's no way of knowing it. It's honestly, that drives me absolutely insane. Because I can look at a scene, I say, I could do that better, or there's something off, or there's something missing. And I'll go cut 3 or 4 more versions of it, and they turn out worse. And at some point, you just have to kind of cut your losses. But man, it still bothers me to this day that I just don't know if those are the best ways to cut the movie. And that's just, you have to just live with that. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. I struggle with that all the time. Because as a perfectionist, it bothers me at the core that I don't know if this is the best way to do this. But you have to give yourself a deadline. The next project's the best project. So you have to just move on. And I think, a lot of filmmakers struggle with that kind of stuff. It's very difficult. And I think if you just sit there, you can get, paralyzed by the amount of options you actually have. And that just slows down the project, or it stops it completely. So, I think you just have to kind of, accept that, give yourself a deadline and upload it and learn from it. And I think the editing process also is extremely painful because you're watching all this stuff and you're like, man, I wish I would have done this, or I could have done this better. I wish I would have shot this, or I'm missing this angle. Well, that's all great. Like, you should be looking at it like that. The problem is if you don't have another movie that you can actually take that feedback that you're giving yourself and actually apply it, then that feedback's no good. And I see a lot of filmmakers that just make one movie. And yes, you can be hard on yourself. Being hard on yourself is what you need to be in this process. You need to be extremely hard on yourself. But if you're not able to be hard, or if you're not able to take what you're being hard about yourself and transition into another movie and actually applying that feedback, then what's the point of it? There is no point. So you can sit there and beat yourself up on your first movie and say, I wish I should have done this. I wish I should have done that. And that's good. But if you don't make another movie, then, what's the point of it? So you have to, if you're going to be hard on yourself, you have to make another movie. That's just the bottom line. And I think a lot of indie filmmakers give up because it's such a difficult process. But man, you have to give yourself another shot. Like, that is just it. If you're giving yourself this harsh feedback, you have to take another shot and learn from your mistakes. And I think our feedback, as far as, look, this is not my magnus opus. I understand what this movie is. It's a super low budget movie. The only reason I'm filming this movie is to be able to upload something, to learn from this movie, use this as your tuition, your understanding of this whole process, and get better from it. If you have that feedback, that mindset, every part of this process is going to be much easier, because I'm not looking at the movie that I'm doing now. I'm looking forward to the next movie. I'm actively looking forward to shooting another movie and learning and getting better. And I think that's how you become a better filmmaker.
I completely agree. And, this is going to be a perfect transition to kind of the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up the episode, which is, as much as that finished product is, something great that you're uploading. The main real benefit is the experience, because again, all the experience here is now going to shape how you look at the writing process, how you look at the filming process, so that you have a better post-production process because you went through it. And then, you mentioned it, you start to get the editing sixth sense. And I think it comes from watching movies, but more importantly, editing movies and doing it. And I would argue that if you gave me and my brother both the same amount of footage, we basically have an incredibly similar movie. Now, again, we've been working together for multiple movies there, but we just understand how it flows together and how it works. And that only comes from actually doing it. Sure, you can watch courses, sure, you can do all this stuff there, but you actually sit down and you do it, you don't necessarily know if that's the correct case or not. And especially because if you're the one filming it, your film style might add a different editing style. So, kind of the last thing I really want to talk about here is the benefit from this post-production process. And the reason why we think it's the best is because if you're looking a way to just completely upgrade your entire filmmaking process, it is getting through a post-production process, getting something uploaded, and that is building your then capabilities to go ahead and do all of the processes from writing, from filming, from post-production. And we're always going to point to the Girl in Cabin 13, in my opinion, of the point when DBS really took off, because we embraced the benefit that we had of going through the nightmare editing, the Morgan Estate and the Devil in the Room, which then set us up to literally have a brand new production model that is just night and day different. So you kind of want to just highlight that's the benefit you get and how impactful that is as a filmmaker moving forward.
Well, I think I want to bring up a point here. The difference of doing a 2.0 version of movies. So this is like our business model. We do a 1.0 version and then we remake the 2.0 version. The Murder House, which is a 2.0 version of the Suicide House, is completely night and day. And it was a much, much easier shoot because we learned from everything that we've done before. And you can't even tell that the movies are anywhere similar other than like the general concept. With the Shapeshifter, which is a brand new concept. Look, I like the movie. I think it's going to be a good movie. It's going to do very, very well on, whatever platforms we get it on. I think it's going to be a good movie. The thing is, do I know that that's the best way to do that movie? I don't think that's the way that we shot it and the way that we told the story, the way I wrote the screenplay, probably is not the best way to write that story. But the only way to know a better way, a better version of that, is to actually shoot that movie. And I think that just comes from experience. I think you honestly are, as an indie filmmaker, everyone thinks that they can get one movie. This is their one shot. They're going to make the movie and they become famous. Where, man, I'm telling you, the better option is to shoot that one movie, learn from that movie, and then shoot the 2.0 version of that movie, because you will fix almost all your problems. And I am so excited to shoot the Shapeshifter 2.0, Girl in Cabin 14, all these other movies that we're doing, because I think you just have to really do these movies multiple times to get really good at this process, because there's just so many different variables, little tweaks, little things that can make these movies better. And I think that's how you become a better filmmaker. And we're pulling each different little things that we do really well from all our other movies. And if you don't have that back catalog, if you don't have that experience, if you don't have multiple movies, then you're really shooting yourself in the foot. And I think that that's a big thing that I see in a lot of indie filmmakers. They'll make 2 movies in 10 years. And then they're like, well, why am I not famous? Well, man, dude, there's just, your odds of becoming famous off of 2 movies is just almost minuscule. Yeah, it happens, but usually those people have a lot of short experience, or they just come up with a really good screenplay, or the cast that they work with is really, really good. I think the way to get better is find a concept that you like and shoot multiple variations of it and get better each time. And I think if you can take that to heart, this whole process is just going to be much easier on your mental health. And I think you're going to just become a better filmmaker in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I really do agree. And I think that just highlights how important we think this pre-production process is, so much so that we think it's going to be the backbone of what we do. You know, having an uploaded product, an uploaded movie allows us to see the better way to do it. Suicide House to the Murder House is massive step up. Into the Forest 2.0 is coming up. So I think we're going to continue to see these movies pay off because we understood what going through that process is. And that's just a small example of the grand scheme of DBS, in the sense that if we continue to do this and learn from these, you're only going to continue to make more and more movies. And the best thing you can do any type of venture in life is to just put more times to it. And you know what we see with indie filmmakers, they stray away from getting the products done for multiple reasons, because you know making movies is hard. It's a very tough thing to do. And ideally, if you can find yourself through this post-production process, if you can find yourself getting through these movies and uploading them, it's only going to add so much value to your ability to be a filmmaker and to your ability to, you know, make returns and do this full time. So again, hopefully, you know, anyone listening out there, getting through the post-production process now, hopefully that kind of helps out, because you know again it's the biggest issue that we see. We call it the void for a reason, and if we can help anyone get out of that and get to a uploaded project, even if it's not ideal but it can get them moving on, I think that is absolutely amazing. So be sure, as always, go ahead, take a look at our Discord online. That is the place to be. We have all of our information on how we make movies for our fans, with our fans. We are going to have open casting soon. So a lot of great stuff going on there. You can check it out with all of our links online. But until then, have a good one.